that have lasted 30 years without like really significant innovation.
But I found like, I mean, when I played Divinity Original Sin, like one of the best things about it, I thought, was just the quality of the writing. Like it's an amazing how much of a difference. I mean, if you take two different games with conversation trees, like the the feel of the dialogue and the conversations and the directions of that those take the story can be like amazingly different just depending on like how good a writer you have, like and how you know both polished and you know differentiated among characters. Like it really is. I I think right. We're still in the case where the way you make one game's dialogue and writing more compelling than another is just get a better writer. More than find a new funky technology for expressing the story.
Right. Well, I do. That's a good point because I think the tendency in as a game, game designer in game development is to try to come up with a flashy technical solution to things like writing and story. Uh, but if you look in the larger context, books have been around for a long time, and writing has been around a long time. What 7,000, 8,000 years, whatever. And still today, whether you're a fan of something like Game of Thrones, of Tolkien, or whatever, it's the writer and the story that's being told which is paramount, not the fact that it's on the page of a book or on your e-reader. The format of that is not important. It's the underlying who the writer and the concepts are getting across and how they express them. So I think
Yep.
when you think about story and characters, yeah, there's no substitute for good writing. But it doesn't prevent people from trying. It's been interesting to see people try different dialogue schemes and scripting schemes. But I was just curious whether you had seen anything recently that caught your attention on
I
that.
mean, the kind of no, I mean this has been around a little while already, but the notion that in the world of dialogue trees that there are dialogue options that you don't see or don't get to say unless you have been building your character in a certain way. Like that is fairly interesting. Like, if you've been playing your character and your previous dialogue options have marked you as being like extremely undiplomatic, you may, then in a future conversation, giving you the rude option to say, but not the most diplomatic option to say because you've established yourself as as undiplomatic. Or there's three things you can say, but if you've talked to a certain person or have been kind to goblins or whatever have you, then there's a fourth option that doesn't show up otherwise.
Right. Yeah, that'd be
Um,
fun.
you know,
That
that's
was,
an interesting kind of twist on the standard dialogue tree
yeah.
system.
There was a little bit of that in the Underworlds. You had certain dialogue options that would only reveal themselves
Mm,
based on the player having achieved certain things
right.
or certain events
Yeah.
happening, but it was
Yes.
pretty limited.
Right. And it was based on like things like specific plot triggers that had either been triggered or not, as opposed to the game trying to figure out, what kind of person you are or how this NPC or his or her group might feel about you or vice versa,
It's
which is a
interesting.
little more involved.
Some of the more modern games have sort of gone the opposite direction, though. I played through Bioshock Infinite, which had a lot of fun with, great game. But one of the things that for me didn't feel always right was when your character started to speak to other characters, they would sometimes say things, and I would say, I don't want to say that. I wouldn't say
Yeah.
that. Why is the
Yeah.
character saying that? And there's that tension if you're playing a game, and it's not a role playing game, but you're playing a game where you start to feel you're put in the eyes of the character. It's the
Right.
game takes from your perspective, but you don't necessarily feel that, hey, that character's not expressing themselves the way
Right.
I would want to
Yes.
express
You're
myself.
driving somebody else's protagonist around the story,
And it can be a
rather than
disconnect at times.
yeah.
Remember the beginning of that game when the characters goes, is in the lighthouse and is calling around, who's out, who's there. And I was thinking, this is not a situation where I would be calling out.
Yeah, right. But in that game, they wanted to, Booker had his personality that was not your personality.
Right.
And so what that game was doing was establishing his personality, and it wasn't about you investing the character with yourself, which is, a different way of doing it. I don't think either is better or worse than the other, but I guess
just
it's
different
more important
approach.
probably just stick to one or the other. Like, are you playing a cipher and you are filling them with your own personality, or is this a character in a book who is an established character for whom you are making occasional decisions? Yeah, I see that that Rob Fermier has joined the chat. Hello, Rob.
Hey, it's Zimu.
I was a big fan of the dialogue trees in the original two Fallouts that were affected by your intelligence or by your charisma or whatever they used for the charisma stat. There was nothing quite as fun as playing through Fallout 1 with like a 2 intelligence and having single words that you could speak. And it seemed like everybody, even though it was just text, it seemed like everybody was like yelling at you to try to get it through your head. And I'm telling you, that's a raccoon.
Once again, folks, Chris is seeing raccoons.
So, Rob did QA on Underworld 2, as I recall.
I believe that is correct. Rob Fermier would later, of course, go on to be one of the Irrational co-founders. So, like I said, we were blessed with excellent QA.
It is kind of amazing on how many people came up through QA at Looking Glass Ball, and you had enough confidence in them to turn them into designers and whatnot later on in their careers.
You could find out a lot about a QA person by the kinds of bugs they would report and how passionately they would champion getting a bug fixed.
I don't know what you're talking about.
I just had a lot of that quote-unquote passion. No, but it was a real skill to be able to sort of tease out what was broken, not just simply broken. Is that okay? There are some bugs that are just okay. The game crashes or it doesn't work, but the more interesting bugs, as it were the ones where the gameplay is not as you expect, or just it's not a good experience. It doesn't feel right, or it could be improved. So QA is more than just about flagging this is broken. It's about how could it be improved. And we had a very iterative process at Looking Glass where things would be under QA for throughout most of the project, and QA had a lot of feedback on refining the gameplay. And so the really talented QA testers saw their role as sort of pushing the development team to refine and improve the game. And so, if someone was really good at that, not only could they play the game very well, but they understood, what was really valuable, what was working on a game level or a section of game, what wasn't working, and kind of how to improve it. It could also, I imagine, be somewhat intimidating. Some of our team members, development guys, to go to them and sort of argue your position. And that was a skill in its own right to convince them.
In fact, I would say specifically, like the best experiences I had with QA, and certainly the way that I tried to operate when I started out in QA myself, right, is you would not just get a description of something went wrong, or even like here's what I think should happen instead. Like to me, like one of the worst kinds of bug reports is the one that says like X should be like this, because that doesn't really give you anything to work with in terms of like, well, what is
why?
Yeah, what's the experience you're having? What's wrong, right? And God forbid you address that problem any other way than the suggested way, because then like it's really hard to close out the bug, right? But rather like an excellent bug report includes here's what happened to me, and what that meant for my experience, right? And why, that result was not a good experience for me. And, ideally also some ideas about like what alternatives might have been better and why, right? But having a really cogent critique, that analyzes how the game works. When you see that in a bug report, you've really got a person who's worth retaining and developing in QA. And again, we had quite a few of those in our history at Looking Glass, which was quite wonderful. Let's see how we're doing for time here. Okay, 20 minutes, so that's good.
20 minutes to get to the end.
Ha.
Quick, somebody call Kevin Wasserman.
Yeah, you think you can finish this for us? Will? Just get on the stick? No? All right.
Who was it who did the speed runs through?
That was Kevin, right?
Kevin.
In Underworld 1, I know it was Kevin Wasserman and I had a sort of competition going on for speed runs, which has since been, our records have been shattered by modern speedrunners, because when you marshal the power of the entire internet, like, someone is going to be way out on the bell curve.
Plus, modern computers would run the game a little more smooth.
There are some advantages there as well, so I eventually got my speed run for Underworld 1 down to an hour and a quarter, and then Kevin came and blew me away at 45 minutes, and I gave up. I ceded the title to him. It involved lots of, dying on purpose so that the silver sapling would teleport you to someplace you needed to be, and there's even cheesier tricks that the champion speedrunners of today use. I was about to say, we should follow the time limit to make sure to take some questions.
All right. Well, that time should be now. Let's take some questions. Anyone? Bueller? There we go.
Okay.
The ecology system.
Oh, we were just talking about that.
We just had a 3-hour meeting about that yesterday.
Well, that
among other things. Sure.
Yeah, so the short answer is yes. Next question. No, so the question is a sneak peek into the ecology system. Are NPCs going to have food/hunting needs and the like? And I'm going to try to remember to repeat these questions so that people can tell what we're talking about later in the archive of this. So we're talking about how to integrate those same kinds of like predator and prey simulations. So if you have an effect on one species in the underworld, there'll be repercussions on the life cycle of others. In addition, how this would tie into our diplomatic model, right? Because as someone was observing in our meeting the other day, like most of politics is fundamentally about how to allocate resources, right? So the various factions in the underworld are going to have opinions about what you do with the local ecology, and so this gets back to the discussions we were having earlier, about how some of the stuff that was very innovative in Underworld 1, like the rendering system and physics system and stuff, we have a lot to build on now that we didn't have. And so, how are we going to build on it? Looking at these other kinds of systems that we can simulate. So we are in fact looking into like what the food web in the underworld is going to be, to what extent we actually like need to build that simulation out, because it's the sort of topic where you really could get into more complexity than is really going to be reflected in the gameplay. And so trying to figure out what the appropriate level at which to abstract that is going to be so that it's really meaningful to the player is definitely something that we've been working hard on. And yeah, we will have more updates to our backers, and